The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Not once, not twice. Over and over again, the sharp sound echoed through the empty office, cutting through the midnight silence like a blade. Marjorie Ellis froze where she stood, her rubber gloves still damp, a rag clenched in her hand. She turned slowly, eyes locking on the glowing screen across the CEO's desk. An international number, country code she didn't recognize. Her heart thumped in her chest. This wasn't her business. She was the night cleaner, nothing more. For 10 years she had walked these halls with her cart squeaking behind her, invisible to the men and women who signed contracts worth more than her lifetime earnings. Nobody ever expected her to touch that desk, let alone answer that phone. And yet the ringing kept pulling her closer. The lights of Newark spread out below the 29th floor, flickering like restless stars over the dark ribbon of the Passaic River. The air conditioner hummed steady, but the office felt too still, too watchful, as if the whole building was holding its breath. Marjorie whispered to herself, "Don't be foolish." Her voice barely carried past the edge of the room. She turned back toward her cart, but the phone screamed again. Louder this time, more urgent. Her hand hovered over the receiver, trembling. She thought of the risk of the supervisor who had once barked at her stick to Mops Ellis. "Don't touch what's not yours." She thought of the bills stacked on her kitchen counter, the overdue notice on her granddaughter's school fundraiser. If she answered, she could lose everything. If she didn't, someone else might. The seconds stretched, each ring slicing through her hesitation. And then, almost against her will, she reached down and picked it up. "Hello," the line crackled with static before a man's voice cut through, thick with a German accent and a sharp edge of panic. "Finally. Is this Sterling Dynamics?" "This is Jonas Meyer from Munich. Where is Victor Sterling? I've been calling all evening." Marjorie's throat went dry. She almost hung up right then, but the desperation in his tone held her in place. This wasn't a wrong number. This was something bigger, far bigger than anything she'd ever been part of. "Sir," she stammered, "Mr. Sterling isn't here. This is the night staff." Jonas groaned. "Listen to me carefully. The contract," someone changed the language. "If it isn't corrected by morning, we are out. Do you understand? Billions on the line." The rag slipped from Marjorie's hand. She gripped the receiver tighter, her knees weak. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to hear this. And yet here she was, the only person in the building, standing between a desperate client and the collapse of a billion-dollar deal. In that instant, everything shifted. She was no longer just wiping down an empty office. She was standing at the crossroads of a choice that would decide not only her future, but the fate of the company itself. And she had no idea what to say next. The truth, though, is that this story doesn't really begin with that call. It begins with Marjorie herself, who she was, how she lived, and why she was the last person anyone expected to hold the future of Sterling Dynamics in her hands. But to understand why Marjorie Ellis was the last person anyone expected to answer that phone, you have to know the life she carried on her shoulders. Marjorie was born and raised on the east side of Newark, in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered more often than they shone, and where neighbors learned to share what little they had. Her father worked the docks until his back gave out. Her mother cleaned houses, sometimes 2 or 3 in a day, just to make sure the family had groceries on the table. Money was always tight, but dignity wasn't something they let slip. Her mother used to tell her, "Margie, it doesn't matter what uniform you wear. What matters is that you wear it with pride." Those words stayed with her even on the longest nights when she rode the number 13 bus home, too tired to even take off her shoes before collapsing on the couch. By the time she was 25, Marjorie had 3 children of her own. Their father drifted in and out, never reliable, always with excuses that fell apart under the weight of reality. So she learned the hard way not to depend on anyone but herself. She picked up whatever jobs she could, waitressing, babysitting, laundry shifts, scrubbing office floors. Steady pay meant survival, and survival meant her kids had food and school shoes even if she went without. Years passed. The children grew up scattered into their own lives. They called her, sometimes visited when they could, but mostly she lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment on Broad Street. The silence there could feel heavy, but she reminded herself better lonely than helpless. Every evening, just before midnight, she'd swipe her badge at the revolving glass doors of Sterling Dynamics, a place that looked more like a monument than an office. The marble lobby stretched high above her head, the air cold with recycled perfection. Security guards in tailored suits glanced at her and then looked away as if she were just part of the furniture. She never minded much. It wasn't respect she expected, it was a paycheck. And so night after night, she pushed her cart across polished floors, vacuumed conference rooms that smelled faintly of expensive cologne, and gathered up paper cups left behind by executives who earned more in a week than she did in a month. Still, she noticed things. Marjorie saw how junior staff stiffened whenever Victor Sterling, the CEO, walked by, tall, silver-haired, with a gaze sharp enough to silence a room. She overheard the clipped tones executives used with assistants' tones that shifted to charm when they spoke with clients. She recognized names from contracts and deals she was never meant to understand: suppliers in South Korea, investors in Switzerland, clients in Germany. She wasn't trying to pry. But when you work in silence, your ears learn to pick up what others discard. Bits and pieces stuck, like the time she heard someone grumble about exclusivity clauses in an elevator, or the heated argument she caught through half-open doors about whether a client would walk away if pushed too hard. And through it all, she kept her head down, telling herself she was invisible. Invisible, that was the word. People saw the cart, the uniform, the mop, but not her. For 10 years, she had walked past the same desks, polished the same glass walls, emptied the same bins, and not once had the man whose name was on the building said hers. Victor Sterling didn't mean to insult her. He didn't even see her. And maybe that was worse. So when that phone rang in his office, when the number flashed across the screen from halfway around the world, it was laughable to imagine that Marjorie Ellis might be the one to pick it up. And yet she did. Which is why the story that unfolded that night mattered so much. Because behind every billion-dollar company are people no one notices. People who carry the weight quietly without applause. People like Marjorie, who never imagined that one choice could pull her from the shadows into the harsh light of power and risk. What she didn't know then was that the ringing phone was only the beginning. The real storm was still waiting, and every second the clock ticked toward morning, the stakes climbed higher. The phone didn't stop. Marjorie thought the first call was bad enough, but when it rang again, the sound hit her chest like a hammer. She jumped, nearly knocking her cart against the polished desk. It was the same number, the same desperate insistence. She swallowed hard, picked it up once more. Ellis Jonas Meyer's voice was clipped, his tone sharp with controlled anger. You said your name was Ellis. Yes, you must listen. This contract is a disaster. Do you understand what happens if I walk away? Hundreds of jobs, billions in revenue gone by morning. Do you understand? Marjorie pressed the receiver to her ear so tightly it hurt. Mr. Meyer, I'm not who you think I am. I clean here at night. There was a pause. Then harshly, so you work there. You can carry a message. The words stung not because they were cruel, but because they echoed what she'd heard her whole life, that she was nothing more than her uniform, that her role was to clean up after the important people. Her hand trembled, but her voice steadied. I'll make sure Mr. Sterling knows first thing in the morning. Please, just hold on until then. No, Jonas snapped. A message is not enough. Tell me this was the clause changed on purpose. Did they intend to deceive us? Her heart lurched. She remembered those executives in the hallway last week, whispering heatedly about slipping the exclusivity clause through. At the time, she hadn't cared. But now it mattered. She closed her eyes, choosing her words carefully. I don't think they're trying to deceive you, but maybe someone here thought you wouldn't notice. Maybe they pushed too far. On the other end, Jonas growled low, his frustration spilling through the line. This is what I feared. Treated like fools. Tell me, why should I wait? Why not walk away tonight? Marjorie's pulse raced. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself to stand taller. Because if you walk away now, no one will even know why until it's too late. At least give Mr. Sterling a chance to answer. You owe yourself that much, don't you, Silence? Only the sound of her own breathing filled her ears. Finally, Jonas exhaled, sharp but softer than before. You speak more sense than half the executives I deal with. Fine. I wait. But only until sunrise. If the clause remains, we're finished. Click. The line went dead. Marjorie set the receiver down slowly, her hands shaking. She stared at the phone as if it might come alive again, and it did. The glow on the screen pulsed like a heartbeat. The hours dragged on. She finished her rounds almost mechanically, her mind replaying every word of the conversation. The contracts, the threat, the billions at stake, and the fact that she of all people was now holding a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. What if Victor Sterling fired her the moment he found out? What if Jonas Meyer walked away anyway? What if this entire building collapsed under the weight of one tiny clause? She tried to shake the thoughts away, but they clung tighter with each tick of the clock. She imagined headlines about Sterling Dynamics' downfall, executives pointing fingers, jobs vanishing, and in the center of it all, her name whispered in secret, the cleaning lady who picked up the wrong call. By the time the first hint of dawn painted the windows, Marjorie was still pacing the CEO's office, too restless to sit, too afraid to leave. She'd stayed longer than ever before, waiting for the moment the elevators would open, waiting for the storm she knew was about to break. And when those doors slid open at 7 sharp and Victor Sterling stepped out with his assistant at his side, Marjorie knew the real confrontation was about to begin. Victor Sterling's polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he strode into his office, his assistant close behind a tablet tucked under one arm. He stopped abruptly when he noticed Marjorie still there, standing near his desk, her hands folded awkwardly in front of her. His eyes narrowed. Why are you still on this floor? Marjorie's throat tightened. She wasn't supposed to speak to him ever. Her job was to finish her shift quietly, invisible. But her voice came out anyway, shaky but firm enough to be heard. Sir, last night the phone kept ringing. I answered. It was Mr. Meyer. He said the contract had been changed. He was ready to walk away. The assistant frowned, flipping quickly through the folder he carried. Exclusivity clause. That wasn't approved. Victor's gaze snapped back to Marjorie. You answered my phone. His tone cut like glass. She nodded, heart pounding. Yes, sir. I know I had no right, but if I hadn't, he would have pulled the deal. I couldn't just ignore it. For a moment, the room was so quiet she could hear the hum of the city outside. She braced herself for the inevitable security called her badge, taken her career over in seconds. But then the assistant's voice broke the silence. She's right. The clause wasn't in the draft I reviewed. Someone must have slipped it in last minute. Victor's jaw tightened. His reflection glared back at him from the glass window as he muttered, "And out who?" Then he spun back to Marjorie. And you? What exactly did you tell Meyer? Her palms were slick with sweat, but she stood straighter than she felt. I told him not to walk away yet. I said you'd want to fix it. I promised him he'd have answers this morning. Victor studied her disbelief flickering across his face. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't even on the payroll above minimum wage. Yet somehow she had kept their biggest client from bolting. The phone rang again. The assistant lunged for it, but Victor raised a hand. Wait. He turned to Marjorie. You've spoken with him. You answer. Her breath caught. Me, yes, you. His tone was steel, but beneath it there was something else, curiosity. Hands trembling, Marjorie picked up the receiver. Mr. Meyer. On the other end, Jonas's voice was sharp, but calmer than the night before. Ellis, did you tell him? Does Sterling understand? She glanced at the CEO, who stood just feet away watching her intently. Yes, Mr. Meyer. He understands. He's going to make this right. Jonas exhaled audibly. Good. Then I wait. But if this clause remains, there is no second chance. She promised again, her voice steadier now. You'll have your answer. Today. When she set the phone down, she realized her knees weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in a long time, Marjorie felt something she hadn't let herself feel: confidence. She wasn't just carrying out orders. She wasn't invisible. In that moment, she was the bridge holding together a deal worth billions. Victor Sterling's gaze lingered on her, as if reassessing someone he thought he'd never have to notice. And though he didn't say it out loud, the truth was clear. This cleaning woman, the one no one in the building ever acknowledged, had just saved his empire from collapse. But the story was far from over. Because once Jonas Meyer demanded a public explanation, the battle that had begun in the quiet of the night was about to erupt in the harsh light of day. The clock on the wall read 7:15 a.m., but it felt later like the day had already been running for hours before anyone else arrived. Victor Sterling stood tall, arms folded, his assistant pacing nervously, with a folder of papers clutched against his chest. Marjorie lingered near the desk, clutching her rag, as though it were the only thing tethering her to reality. The phone rang again. This time Victor didn't hesitate. He motioned to his assistant, who tapped a button to switch it to speaker. Jonas Meyer's voice erupted into the room, tense and raw. At last, Sterling. Do you know the kind of night I've had? Do you know how close I came to tearing this contract apart? Victor's jaw tightened. His voice was measured, but there was steel in it. Mr. Meyer, first, let me say thank you for your patience. I am aware of the issue. You're aware, Jonas shot back, incredulous. And who told you? Certainly not your board. Certainly not your lawyers. Victor's eyes flicked to Marjorie. For the first time in his career, the CEO of Sterling Dynamics gestured toward a cleaning woman standing in his office. From someone I should have been paying attention to a long time ago. Marjorie froze. The words struck her harder than any reprimand ever had, not because they hurt, but because they acknowledged her. Her. Jonas went quiet for a moment, as though processing. Then he growled, She told me enough to wait. If not for her, there would be nothing left to discuss this morning. Victor nodded once firmly. And she was right to do so. The exclusivity clause should never have been there. It will be removed immediately. The deal stands exactly as we agreed. Silence lingered, the kind of silence that carried weight. Then Jonas's voice softened, though it still carried an edge. Good. But next time, Sterling, I expect more respect. My company is not a pawn to be played with. You have my word, Victor replied. It won't happen again. The call ended. The room exhaled. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the assistant burst out, flipping through the contract draft with trembling hands. He's right. The clause was slipped in at the 11th hour. Someone inside legal must have pushed it through without clearance. Victor's face darkened. His reflection glared back at him from the glass window. He spun toward the door. Get me the head of legal. Now! The assistant bolted. Victor turned back to Marjorie, his eyes sharper now, but not with anger, with something closer to recognition. You saved us from disaster, Miss Ellis. Do you realize that? Her lips parted, but words wouldn't come. Most of the people in this building wouldn't have had the courage to do what you did last night, he continued, stepping closer. You answered when no one else would. And because of that, we still have our biggest client. Her chest tightened with a feeling she hadn't known in years. Recognition. Real recognition. But the storm wasn't done. By mid-morning, the 14th-floor boardroom buzzed with executives summoned on short notice. The table gleamed under the harsh lights. Faces pale, voices hushed. Everyone knew something had gone wrong. Victor entered first, commanding silence without a word. Behind him, to the shock of every suit in the room, walked Marjorie Ellis. She kept her head low, but her presence was undeniable. Victor stood at the head of the table. His voice was cold, direct. Someone here tried to slip a clause into a billion-dollar contract without authorization. If not for Miss Ellis, he gestured toward her, but Sterling Dynamics would have lost Jonas Meyer and everything tied to him. A murmur swept through the room. Eyes darted toward Marjorie, some disbelieving, some embarrassed. Victor's hand slammed against the table. "Which one of you signed off on this?" All heads turned toward the head of legal, a man in his 50s with thinning hair. He shifted uncomfortably. We thought the exclusivity clause might protect the company's interests." "Protect?" Victor barked. "You nearly destroyed us." Meyer saw it for what it was, greed. "If not for Miss Ellis, we'd be finished right now." The man stammered, but Victor cut him off. "Pack your things. You're done here." The room went silent. No one dared breathe. Victor turned back toward Marjorie. His voice softened. "You taught us all something this morning. Titles don't define value. Actions do." For years, she had walked these halls like a shadow, unseen, unheard. Now, standing at the center of the most powerful room in the building, she felt the opposite. Every pair of eyes was on her, not with scorn, but with respect. Her knees threatened to give way, but she stayed standing. She wasn't invisible anymore. Victor folded his arms, pacing slowly. "From this day forward, I want every division head in this company to remember the people you overlook may be the very people who save you." Miss Ellis reminded me of that in a way I won't forget. For Marjorie, it was almost too much to process. She had come in to finish her shift, mop in hand, expecting nothing but silence. Instead, she had stopped a catastrophe, held her ground with a billionaire client, and forced a CEO to admit the truth in front of his entire board. The public showdown was complete. The lopsided balance of power had shifted, if only for a moment, and the world inside Sterling Dynamics would never see her the same way again. By the time the boardroom emptied, the building buzzed with whispers. News spread faster than memos, how Sterling Dynamics nearly lost everything overnight, how a contract clause almost cost billions, and how a woman in a janitor's uniform stopped the collapse before it began. Marjorie Ellis didn't tell her side of it. She never did. She slipped back into her routine, cleaning up coffee cups and wiping fingerprints off glass, but now, something had changed. For the first time, people stopped her in the hallway. They said her name. They asked how she was. It was strange hearing "Good morning, Miss Ellis" from executives who had walked past her for years without seeing her. She didn't know how to respond at first, so she simply nodded, her lips tugging into a small, shy smile. Victor Sterling kept his word. The head of legal was quietly escorted out, his replacement sworn in with stricter oversight. In hushed corners, employees murmured about the clause and the cleaning woman, a story that was already taking on the weight of legend inside the company walls. But Victor did something else, something Marjorie never expected. He asked her to sit in on a staff meeting. At first, she thought he was joking. Her sitting with executives in tailored suits, speaking in acronyms and strategies. She almost said no. But then she remembered that night, the ringing phone, the moment she told Jonas Meyer to wait. She remembered how her voice had held steady even when her hands shook. So she said yes. The meeting wasn't easy. She sat at the edge of the long table, her uniform crisp but out of place against the dark blazers around her. The executives spoke quickly, debating numbers, and risked their voices sharp with urgency. She kept her hands folded, waiting until Victor turned to her directly. "Miss Ellis, you've been here longer than some of the people in this room. What do you notice when we don't?" The room went still. Every head turned toward her. For a moment she wanted to disappear back into her mop and cart. But she lifted her chin, remembering her mother's words. It doesn't matter what uniform you wear. Wear it with pride. I notice when people feel ignored, she said quietly. And I notice that when they do, they stop trusting you. It wasn't a business report. It wasn't a polished presentation. But it was the truth. And for the first time, people in power listened. In the weeks that followed, Marjorie's life didn't transform into wealth or luxury. She still took the bus home every night. She still clipped coupons and folded laundry alone in her apartment. But something inside her had shifted. She was no longer invisible. Her children called more often, pride in their voices, as they said, "Mom, we heard what you did." Her granddaughter beamed when she told classmates, "My grandma saved a company." And within Sterling Dynamics, she was no longer the night staff. She was Marjorie Ellis, the woman who had answered a call no one else dared to pick up. Still, she never bragged. She never told the story outside those walls. To her, she had only done what felt right. But respect, real respect, had a way of changing everything. And though the deal was saved and the boardroom crisis resolved, the truest aftermath wasn't measured in billions. It was measured in recognition, in dignity, restored in the quiet but undeniable reminder that every person matters, no matter their title. On a Friday evening a few weeks later, Marjorie stood by the tall windows of the 29th floor, waiting for her bus. The city of Newark stretched out beneath her, a sea of golden lights shimmering across the Passaic River. She rested her palm against the cool glass, her reflection looking back at her, not just the uniform, not just the mop and gloves, but the woman who had picked up a phone when no one else did. In her other hand, she still held her cleaning rag. It was just a piece of cloth worn soft by bleach and time, but now it felt different. For years, it had been a symbol of invisibility, of the work nobody noticed. Tonight, it was a reminder sometimes the smallest tools in the quietest hands can change everything. She thought about that call, how easy it would have been to ignore it, to tell herself, "That's not my job." But she hadn't. She had stepped forward even when fear told her to step back. And because she did, she proved something no contract or title ever could value isn't written on a business card. It's revealed in action, in courage, in the moments when no one expects you to rise, but you rise anyway. Behind her, the building hummed with life again. Executives rushing to meetings, assistants clutching folders, security guards nodding as they passed. But when they saw her now, they didn't look through her. They looked at her. They said her name. Marjorie Ellis smiled faintly, tucking the rag back into her cart. Tomorrow night she would return same as always. But she knew something had shifted forever. She wasn't invisible anymore. And maybe that's the message for all of us. Don't underestimate the people you overlook. Because one day when the world is on the line, it might be their quiet hands that save the day. In Marjorie's story, we are reminded of a simple but profound truth. Dignity does not come from titles, salaries, or corner offices. It comes from courage and integrity. Too often, society overlooks those who work quietly in the background, assuming their voices don't matter. Yet it is in those overlooked places that true wisdom and strength often live. When Marjorie picked up the phone, she broke through the silence of invisibility and proved that one brave choice can change everything. Her story is not just about saving a contract. It's about breaking free from the chains of prejudice and learning to see people for who they are, not for the labels placed on them. As the old saying goes, don't judge a book by its cover, because sometimes the person you least expect is the one who will hold the entire story together. Let this be a call for us to listen more closely, to stand firm in the face of unfairness, and to value ourselves even when others fail to see us. If this story touched you, share your reflections in the comments, like the video to support the message, and subscribe so you won't miss more inspiring stories. Wishing you peace, strength, and hope in every step ahead.